Halo Combat Evolved was a beast of a game from the moment it released. In fact, it seemed like a pretty big deal from the moment it was announced, with buyers fighting back and forth over exclusivity as it neared completion. You can tell how monumental its success was by the fact that it was a launch title on Microsoft's first ever foray into the gaming market, and still blew the competition out of the water, even from a company that many consumers weren't used to seeing in competition against the gaming titans that are Sony and Nintendo. Halo just did a great job of constructing an interesting world. Playing as a cybernetically enhanced super soldier known as the Master Chief, you, along with your allies in the United Nations Space Command, will defend humanity and space itself from the alien forces known as the Covenant in the 26th century. Boasting exceptional graphics, a memorable soundtrack, unique combat, and fast-paced multiplayer, Halo had a lot that it needed to get across to players in 2001. Who may not have even been used to such a gaming experience in the comfort of their own living room. But luckily, this game has an incredible method of teaching the player that gives you as much of its information as possible in quick bursts. It's conveyed to you very quickly, but isn't needed to memorize or focus on for long, so you can move on to the next piece of information. This is all done by stark character models, colors, and sound effects, as well as unique designs in vehicles and weapons. Even if they aren't standing directly in front of you or have a visible nameplate or marker on their model, you can still recognize if an entity is friend or foe, what they're wielding, where they're shooting, and any other necessary information a sci-fi soldier would need in the heat of an explosive conflict. This fast-paced gameplay was a major factor in Halo's success, but that wasn't all there was to it. Any game can be fast, but it takes a certain something beyond the initial experience to remain interesting, understandable, and most importantly, fun. We'll figure out how all of these goals were achieved as we discover what's so great about Halo Combat Evolved. Halo begins by quickly getting its players accustomed to the sci-fi two-stick shooter they're entering by explaining everything as efficiently as possible without being confusing or requiring you to look up which button does what and committing it all to memory. As Master Chief wakes up from cryogenic slumber, his suit is put through tests to check player preference on looking controls, as well as a calibration to introduce the function and speed of your shield. After that, it's into the action, but it's still not overwhelming for anyone picking up a controller for the first time. The doors that you're expected to pass through are indicated by green lights that guide you through the dark hallways in the beginning as you learn to find your way around on your own. The initial Covenant invasion gives you a chance to see both grunts and elites in action, the two most common enemy types you'll experience in the game. You'll face some grunts on your own early on, but the first elite you face is surrounded by other Marines, drawing its fire as you get used to your assault rifle that you just picked up. The game conveys that the grunts are not your biggest threat in this combat scenario, as they run around chaotically giggling and grunting with their high-pitched voices and small stature. This leaves the player more inclined to address the bigger elite units first, as they feel safe ignoring the grunts for the time being. The elites also feel a little more special and notably dangerous due to the fact that they have visible energy shields just like the player. You can tell when they're active and when they've been destroyed due to visual cues during combat. Even though you're waking up to a hectic scenario of close quarters combat in a new video game's universe, it's easy to differentiate between ally and enemy fire in the first level due to the difference in visual effects, with Marines' bullet-based weaponry emitting more of a yellow combustion effect and alien technology leaving behind neon green and blue laser blasts. After you've wandered around the hallways of the Pillar of Autumn and taken on a few enemy aliens in combat, the more tutorial-style section will actually begin as Cortana begins to aid your escape. The concept of an AI installed in your suit is a great explanation for the video game features of heads-up displays and waypoints. This will also be the introduction for your motion sensor minimap. This also means you have the opportunity for storytelling and advice without the inclusion of another character to either get in your way or bog down the hardware capabilities of the original Xbox when this game was released. There's not any real sense of where your objectives are, so if things seem to be taking longer than expected, Cortana may drop a waypoint for you and remind you of your objective. What probably blew me away the most in this entire game was the non-playable characters. The artificial intelligence is really impressive. It's much more responsive and participatory than a lot of games would boast in that era. Ally soldiers respond vocally to specific things you do and enemies you kill, or they'll climb in your Warthog to act as your gunner if you pull up next to them. This clever AI can be found on the enemy side too, with enemy units diving out of the way of oncoming vehicles or actively searching for you if you fire within their vicinity, rather than immediately knowing where you are and preparing to shoot you the moment you turn a corner. The aliens that you'll be facing in Halo's campaign have a lot of personality to them, and it blends itself well with the gameplay. For instance, the grunts are chaotic and will run around in fear just as often as they will shoot you. Sure, this makes the battlefield more chaotic just for the sake of user experience and excitement, but in a gameplay sense, it also causes an inaccurate player to waste their ammo. And once the grunts have put a little distance between you and themselves, they may throw a grenade at you to take advantage of this chaos, while you may have focused your attention on the more directly combatant elites or jackals. You may regularly find yourself accompanied by space marines who help you take on the enemy, but the lack of named characters actually helps you separate Master Chief from the rest of these foot soldiers, establishing that you're on a whole different level than them in terms of capabilities. This also separates this game from a lot of other party-esque squads in other Turn of the Millennium shooters, like Call of Duty, Killzone, and Battlefield. Many entries of each having your narrative party guiding you through each scenario, but also actively saving your hide on a few occasions. In Halo, you feel more like you are the greatest line of defense the humans have against the Covenant. The nameless party members also allow for more disposable comrades, which doesn't sound like a beneficial part of the gameplay experience right off the bat, but actually, the inclusion of allies who have the capacity to both kill and die greatly affects the flow of combat and how you approach different scenarios. In a game like Call of Duty, for instance, many of the entries in that series feature a recurring cast of unkillable characters for the purpose of storytelling alone. These characters can't die simply because they have to be present in the next cutscene. But in order to keep these characters from being immortal killing machines, their accuracy, damage, or sometimes ability to affect enemies at all has to be adjusted to keep the games from being too easy. That means that despite all of the chaos around you in the trenches, no progress will actually be made if you are pinned down. But in Halo, there's a certain number of good guys and a certain number of bad guys, and certain points at which either of these sides will be partially replenished. This means all of the non-playable characters have an impact on the battlefield, bringing Halo's combat to life by a much larger degree than many other shooters of its era. This also gives the player more incentive to keep these allies safe from alien attacks, or, in a more brutal turn of events, even kill these allies yourself for additional weapons or ammo in a pinch. Speaking of weapons, let's talk about how Halo constructed two very different sides of this science fiction war, and use this to make the combat interesting and unique. The Covenant weapons are really interesting, and a nice deviation from the typical science fiction weaponry of basically a gun but shoots some form of energy instead of bullets, but serves the exact same function as bullets. In Halo, however, we have guns like the Needler, which fires some sort of heat-seeking crystal that does little damage on its own, but once enough are stuck in your foe, the crystals will explode for additional damage. We also do have some of those typical aforementioned energy weapons, but they often focus more heavily on damaging shields, which can help players strategize how to take on enemies based on either difficulty or multitude, using combinations of shield and health damaging weapons. The player can only carry two weapons, unlike a game like Doom, where you can simply scroll through any number of killing tools to find the one that you think would be the most fun to use in that moment. This means a little more thought has to be placed into the purposes that each weapon serves, as well as where your strengths and weaknesses would lie with that current loadout. The fact that your health doesn't regenerate but your shield does is actually more incentivizing in terms of using your cover and flanking your enemies. The display on your frequently accessible assault rifle provides information on how much ammo is left, as well as a compass. More guns have equally important information on display for the character, but it doesn't always come in the form of a number. The Needler shows all of its ammunition sticking out of the back of the gun itself, so you still have a complete understanding of how many shots you have left. The plasma pistol shows you when it's fully charged to take out an enemy's shield, and the plasma rifle has a great color gradient on the left side that shows the progress toward the gun overheating as it's being fired. All of these touches on the guns and weapons could have easily been swept aside in favor of a number the developers could just slap on the corner of the screen like most shooter games have, but instead they put in these little touches on your equipment that give the soldiers and sides of each battle a little more character. The implementation of grenades was actually pretty clever, being one of the first games that allowed for throwing of grenades as well as the use of melee attacks without having to switch to a specific grenade or unarmed weapon slot. You can keep your assault rifle in hand, quickly throw a plasma grenade or smack a Covenant soldier with the butt of your gun, and continue on with the action, not having to find cover and scroll back to your weapon as you might in games such as Doom or Duke Nukem. One more note on a big change in the way a feature was included in first-person shooters was the implementation of vehicles with more dynamic player interaction. For a lot of games around this time, if they included a vehicle section, they often locked the player into that vehicle for the duration of the level. It's actually pretty impressive that Halo allows you to enter and exit the Warthog or even enemy vehicles like the Ghost and Banshee at will. You can even shoot enemy soldiers out of these vehicles and claim them as your own. And if you've got any allies with you, that clever AI will take over and hop in as your gunner if the vehicle has a spot for them. As Xbox Live wasn't around until roughly a year after release, the original Xbox version of Halo did not support what we now consider traditional online gameplay, even once the multiplayer service had launched in 2002. Even then, broadband internet, which the original Xbox required to go online at all, was far from commonplace in 2002. So, the multiplayer experience for Halo's players consisted of split-screen or LAN parties, tethering together up to 4 Xboxes to play with up to 16 people in one game. This feature was actually an unanticipated success to Bungie, as the system link capabilities of the game itself were not added until very late in development. Taking a look at the multiplayer experience that friends could partake in with each other makes it clear why this was a forerunner in the way video games are played online to this day. Most importantly of all, this game was fast-paced, even with up to 16 players on those little home consoles. You spawn in with your team or in free-for-all, the maps are small enough to be digestible but interesting enough to keep gameplay from becoming stale after 5 minutes, and everyone's on the same playing field at the start. Depending on the mode you're playing in, you either have to find better weapons and abilities on the map, or work with what you're given, just as everyone around you is. If you get taken out, then the respawn gets you back in the game quickly. It's fun to have all-out firefights with your little 4-person squads. It feels much more like a sporting event with clear differences in teams between red and blue. And whichever jersey you're wearing with each new match is easy to pick up and switch your brain to say the other color armor is bad. The stages have great height differences to create interesting means of approaching the enemy team. The stages feel very cyclical all the way around along the outside edges, providing a continuous flow of combat no matter who has the upper hand. While you're exploring each of these maps, you may also stumble across power-ups and special weapons in secretive or precarious locations. As cool and useful as the power-ups of invisibility and overshield are, they still aren't overpowered. If the game is going as fast-paced as it should be, then the overshield might allow you to tank through one more enemy, and the invisibility might let you sneak past one more person until you need to start shooting. These can be important single kills though in the flow of battle and are worth grabbing, but they won't send you on a killing spree. And at first, the idea of missing out on a super powerful ability might be a little less than exciting, but what wouldn't be exciting would be if the enemy team who's already trampling your score gets a hold of such an ability that just further separates the skill level involved. After all, this is a classic get-good game. The best you can do is learn the maps and hit those headshots. Anything beyond that may just come down to connection speed or how fast you can pull the trigger. And the fact that everything just boils down to how well you play feels good. While recording footage for this in the Master Chief Collection, I would enjoy myself in an occasional bout of 1-on-4 after my teammates left the match just because I liked an extra challenge for a bit to see how well I could handle myself. I never had an original Xbox when I was growing up, but I remember visiting a friend, being handed one of those giant Duke controllers, and being thrown into the chaos of Halo and experiencing exciting split-screen action for the first time in my life. And I gotta say, then and now, it's made me feel like this was an experience I was missing out on, and a game that everyone should play at some point in their lives. Halo Combat Evolved was a huge leap forward for first-person shooter games, as well as a push towards the way we play multiplayer games to this day. Many first-person shooter games to follow in its footsteps were often referred to as Halo clones, due to the prevalence and success of Halo being a household video game for anyone experiencing Microsoft's first breakthrough in the gaming market. This isn't to say that quality first-person shooters didn't already exist, but many of the higher quality options like Half-Life and Deus Ex were going to be PC exclusive and very heavy on story content. If you wanted a first-person shooter experience at home, the best options were games like Medal of Honor on PlayStation or Perfect Dark on N64, among ports of Doom and other older games that were finally reaching living room TVs. But Halo was able to pull off a little more by utilizing the power of the new Xbox and delivering a fresh, fast, and fun shooter experience in a time when shooters were often considered clunky or complicated for newcomers. Luckily, home consumers didn't need to be a competitive Quake player to quickly grasp the straightforward gameplay and understandable environments of Halo and witness a huge leap forward for shooters, Microsoft multiplayer, and gaming as a whole. And that is what's so great about Halo Combat Evolved. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of What's So Great About Gaming, as we dissected Halo Combat Evolved. Make sure to tell us what you think about Halo, or even suggest a game for another video. If you want to help in supporting the channel, consider checking out our Discord, Twitch, or Patreon. Links for all of those are in the description. If you want to hear what's great about another game, check out the link to our last episode, Yoshi's Island, on screen or in the description. And please take the time to subscribe to be involved in the discussions here. Thanks again for watching. Now go play a great game. We'll see you next time.